Delighted to welcome Lise Ann. She's part of a group in Colorado who pioneered the idea of crisis informatics and the use of social media back in 2007 when it all really didn't exist. It was just starting to emerge, so they traced with their research how this emerged and how it has developed. So I'm really excited that you're here, and she's giving a talk at a workshop that we're organizing in Brussels on Thursday on information infrastructuring for disaster risk management. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hear what you've got to say, Lise. So.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm visiting from the University of Colorado in Boulder, where I did my research as part of the U.S. National Science Foundation funded grant called Project EPIC. And EPIC looks at how social media and communication technology have changed the way that people communicate and share information in disaster, and the implications this has for the design and development of new solutions. My research focuses specifically on the challenges that emergency responders face in integrating social media into their formal emergency management communications. And much of my research has looked at a grassroots movement from within emergency response called a Virtual Operational Support Team, or VOST, and so that's the focus of my talk. So before I jump into the details, I want to give you some background on the challenges that led to the development of the idea of a virtual team. I'm going to talk about the origin of the idea and an evaluation we did of the first emergency trial. I'm also going to talk about research that I've done within this community to understand how the concept has evolved and grown over time. And I'll conclude with some reflections on what I think are the important takeaways from this idea. And then finally, this is really two talks together. It's a talk about virtual operational support, which will give you some framing for understanding the second part of the talk, which is I want to introduce you to a collaboration that I'm doing, an ongoing collaboration project that I have with this community. When I first began my research in 2011, the use of social media in emergency management was highly controversial. There was a widespread distrust within the emergency management community and a belief that social media was really just a hotbed for misinformation and rumor. More generally, at that time, there was a lack of support within emergency management organizations. There were no resources allocated, no funding, tools, or official sponsorship for the idea. In addition, in the US, there was a poor fit between the informal nature of social media communications and the formal command and control models that emergency responders were forced to use, or that they used. And in some cases, organizations had strict mandates in place that prohibited the use of social media altogether. As these channels were gaining popularity, there was an increasing pressure from within the public that emergency responders should use social media to share emergency information. And also at the same time, there was a growing community within emergency response that felt like the use of social media for emergency communications was both valuable and necessary. But social media was a huge unknown for emergency responders. Where there are typically clearly defined operational processes and protocols, there was no roadmap for how to make use of these new channels as part of emergency communication. So given these constraints, and inspired by examples of emerging digital volunteerism, an emergency manager in New Mexico named Jeff Phillips came up with a new approach. His idea was, in the event of a large-scale event, the teams on the ground's resources are often fully extended. And so the idea was that they could make use of and leverage the support of a team of trained and trusted digital volunteers to help them with both social media monitoring and communications. Unlike spontaneous digital volunteers, this team would be predefined, so defined ahead of time and made up of trusted colleagues from within emergency management, with a combination of both emergency management skills and also the social media skills to manage social media communications. He called this team a Virtual Operational Support Team, or VOST, And in the spring of 2011, he formed VOST Osborne from a distributed team of his most trusted colleagues in emergency management. He introduced the idea that same spring at a National Emergency Management Association conference and conducted it as a proof of concept exercise where the idea gained some momentum. One of the attendees at this conference was a federal PIO named Chris Erickson, who saw VOST as a potential workaround for the challenges that she was facing. In late August, when she was called to the Shadow Lake fire in eastern Oregon, a fire that was in a remote location with a limited impact on the surrounding communities, she felt that the circumstances were right for trying out this new idea. And so as she was on the way to the fire, she enlisted the help of Jeff Phillips and his team, and Shadow Lake became the first emergency trial of the VOST. I first learned about the Shadow Lake VOST shortly after it happened, and they invited me to attend their after action review in New Mexico. And to evaluate what they'd done, we performed a mixed methods case study, interviewing the members of the team and analyzing both their internal documents and communications and their public-facing social media communications during the fire. As a federal PIO, Chris Erickson faced a strict mandate that prohibited her from using any form of social media to communicate with the public. She saw the VOST as a way of bending the rules. What she did was she positioned the VOST team as knowledgeable outsiders, communicating with the public on the incident management team's behalf. This allowed her to maintain a level of separation between the official team and the VOST. She reports that she knew she was bending the rules and also potentially risking her job in this first emergency trial, but she felt like the risk was worth it in order to be able to communicate with the public more effectively. In this first trial, we observed that the VOST had invented both a new organizational structure for handling social media and also a new rule. Members of the team worked in shifts to monitor social media and mainstream media communications for actionable information and also to maintain the social media presence surrounding the fire. And our analysis of their chat communications revealed that there was a tight coordination between the VOST team and the team on the ground, and also a high level of camaraderie. Each of the members of the Shadow Lake VOST considered this first trial to be a success, but they were also willing to admit that they were reluctant to say anything negative because they felt like they were campaigning for a new idea in a really hostile environment. Some of the key benefits that they identified were an extension of resources during a large-scale event, and because these resources were not on the ground or local, they could focus on social media without the risk of being drawn away in a disaster. It also allowed them to expand the hours of coverage. So an example of that is one member of the team was on the East Coast, and so she would get up and catch up on social media communications that happened through the night and send a report to Chris Erickson so that she'd have the latest information as she headed into her morning meeting, the morning briefing. In addition, we felt like the characteristics of this virtual team also contributed to their success. The team was small, there was an extended project duration that fostered strong working relationships between the members, and they had strong leadership through Jeff Phillips. Each of these members had worked with one another in the past, and they possessed a high level of the necessary skills, and their objectives for Shadow Lake were clearly defined. We did feel, however, that moving forward with this idea, they would have to do it slowly and that it could be potentially risky on larger scale events where there was more social disruption. So following this first trial, the number of teams grew quickly, and the founding members of the VOST community grappled with how to strike a balance between maintaining a cohesive vision of VOST while at the same time supporting innovation and experiments at the individual team level. To understand VOST as it was evolving, I worked within this community as both a participant and a researcher. and in many instances collaborated on the development and evaluation of new ideas. As part of my work with VOST, I've worked as a member of 8 different teams, and I've participated in over 50 emergency activations. So this map shows where VOST teams are currently active or in development worldwide. And what started originally as Jeff Phillips' idea of a predefined team and Bounded has evolved into a virtual network of teams where members share ideas and practices, and often team members within this community work across teams and lend resources and expertise as needed. So now I'm going to shift to discussing VOST as a community and community practices. So in the spring of 2012, the founding members of VOST formed the VOST Leadership Coalition, which they refer to as a coalition of the willing. It's organized by the VOST team leads, but membership is open to anyone willing to participate in the exchange of ideas and the evolution of virtual operational support as a concept. So members include the team leaders, members of the VOST community, but also a wide membership across other digital humanitarian organizations. And they feel strongly that the purpose of the Leadership Coalition was not about defining or standardizing specific operating procedures, but about maintaining a cohesive vision and sharing lessons learned with one another while giving the individual teams the freedom to define the processes that will allow them to align closely with the teams on the ground and the context they were working within. The coalition meets once a month, and they publish their agenda as a crowdsourced document, allowing anyone who wants to contribute to this agenda. The start of each meeting operates as a test of their emergency broadcast system. So they have a system set up to send a message to each of the team leads, and each communicates back so that they know that they can stay in contact in case of a large-scale event. The primary focus of these meetings is on discussion of recent activations and the sharing of lessons learned from the team leads. But they also use this forum for roundtable discussions on specific topics of interest and the continual evaluation of new tools and technologies. Another primary way that the members of this community stay in touch with one another is through asynchronous chat rooms. So each team typically has a team room that's used to stay in touch with one another and to share information on an ongoing basis within the team. There's also a global chat that they call the ATV room, or All Things VOST. And like the Leadership Coalition, membership is open to anyone within this community. And this is where members of VOST get to know each other, they exchange ideas and share information in this channel. And it also serves as a really important space for the team leads. If they need additional resources during an activation, they can post here. And because VOST has grown into this global community, there are people around the clock that are available and listening if they need extra resources. So now that I've given you a feel for how they communicate and share information as a community, I want to talk a little bit about virtual operational support to give you a feel for how it works in an emergency activation. So as I mentioned earlier, each team is free to define the processes and protocols for coordinating with the response team on the ground. And there are a lot of variations on this. So there's no way to speak generally, but many of the teams share common tools and procedures. And so I'd like to draw on my experience working with one of these teams, so Pacific Northwest Team 2, to give you a feel for how virtual operational support gets enacted in a disaster. So and these tools are actually common across the teams, so these common communication protocols and shared tools allow them to share resources across the teams fairly easily. So it may not be exactly the same, but there's enough commonality that this is sort of the generic model. So let's see, during an activation there are 2 primary channels of communication for sharing information. One is the VOST workbook and the other is the incident room. So I'm going to talk about those two. So the VOST workbook, a shared spreadsheet, acts as the information backbone. It's a living document used to share information between the VOST team members and the team on the ground throughout the activation. The main page of the workbook provides details about the assignment list for the current operational period and important updates coming from the incident management team on the ground. Members of the VOST also use the workbook to provide information about their availability and to log in and out for their work activities, work shifts. And that's so that it's clear for everybody who's available and who's working, and it also helps to track their hours. The results of social media monitoring efforts get recorded here in the search results tab here, along with links to the content, their assessment of why it's important, and their evaluation of what the severity of it is. At the end of the day, the workbook is saved in an archive format, functioning as a formal record of what happened that day. And many of the forms many of the tabs within this workbook mirror the formal forms used by the incident management team on the ground. So moving to the incident room, this is where the conversation takes place between both the VOS team and the team on the ground. At the start of an activation, the VOS team lead creates a separate chat room referred to as the incident room. Membership in this room is restricted to only those VOS members who are currently participating in the activation and the team on the ground. The incident team uses this channel to share the latest information coming from incident command. For example, they'll often post in a link to the morning briefing so that the VOS members can attend virtually. They also use this space to provide the latest breaking information from incident command and to post their updates and images so that those can then be translated into social media content. This is where VOS members on an ongoing basis discuss what they're seeing on social media and help evaluate it with one another. And on incident command, there's typically at least one person following this conversation at all times, so they have a sense as well. So now returning to the benefits we identified from Shadow Lake, these same benefits still hold true, and in a sense are much more robust, because now rather than a small bounded team, it's expanded to a larger global team. But I would also add to this something that I think is also an important contribution, that as the VOS community has grown and shared their experience and resources across teams, the members of this community gain experience across a wide variety of circumstances, giving them a breadth of experience that would not have been possible otherwise. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that I don't